Capital and author of Unintended Consequences, Why Everything You've Been Told About the Economy is Wrong, and Alexis Goldstein returning, a former information technologist at Merrill Lynch and Morgan Stanley, now a member of Occupy the SEC. It's great to have you guys here.
Thanks for having us.
So, Ed, your book is about incentives, partly, and about incentives for investment and risk-taking. And one of the things that I have been struggling with in writing my own book and looking at Wall Street and seeing this sort of cascaded scandals is that it just seems that incentives can go in a bunch of different directions. And one of the ways they can do is to incentivize risk-taking or work harder and more performance. But they also seem to incentivize a lot of cheating and a lot of corner cutting. And it seems to me that the culture of finance has something deeply rotten about it. Do you agree? I'm serious.
It's not a loaded question. Well, I just think there's a lot of money changing hands on Wall Street and in banks, and you're going to expect the bank robbers to be there. So sure, are there criminals involved in that activity? Do we have to look very carefully, supervise those operations, root them out wherever we find them? Of course we do. And I think every investor has to recognize that as well. I know in my own personal investments, I spread them over a lot of firms because I'm very fearful that I'm going to find one firm or another, the Bernie Madoffs of the world, that are stealing my money as opposed to investing it. But I do think that society works on 95% of the people being honest and cooperating, no matter the supervision, which doesn't mean that honest people on the margins don't perhaps do some things that are inappropriate. But for the most part, cooperation is what's driving our economy and our civilization forward. Well, much more benefit than cost.
But see, I would disagree with that because having worked on Wall Street, I mean, everything is a cost-benefit analysis. And something that happens a lot is you look at what would the cost be if we were to violate this particular regulation? What is the ultimate fine? And if everything is a cost-benefit analysis, you are almost incentivized. You are incentivized to push the envelope in terms of what's legal and what's not legal if you know that when you are caught, the fine that is levied is going to be less than the profit that you make. And we are in an environment right now where we have seen, you know, Glenn Greenwald calls it the two-tier justice system, where we have seen 99% of the cases that the Federal Reserve has done in bank enforcement actions have not resulted in the bank having to admit any wrongdoing. So not only have we not seen anyone go to jail, but people don't even have to admit that they did anything wrong when we do see the regulators come in. So even before this sort of environment that has happened after the crash, you had this cost-benefit analysis where it makes sense to violate regulations. But since we now have this culture of immunity for bad behavior on Wall Street.
I just don't think the math works because my experience in business is that people care greatly about their careers. And if they get caught doing something inappropriate, or even if they do something appropriate and it doesn't work out, they often lose their career. And the cost of losing their career is way greater.
Amaranth, the guy that blew up Amaranth was able to go off and create a whole new
I'm not saying it's true in every circumstance, but I'd say in the vast majority of circumstances, if you get caught with your hand in the cookie jar, if you get caught doing something inappropriate, or even if you take a legitimate business risk and it fails, there's a high probability that your career is coming to an end.
But
and the likelihood that you can get back into the game
again
again
of the crisis. We have seen a huge amount of banks that have failed substantially, bailed out by the government, subsidized by the U.S. taxpayer, secret Fed lending programs by the Federal Reserve for both the banks and private companies and even some foreign governments and foreign companies. And we haven't seen any punishment for any of those things. So there's, again, I say it again, a culture of immunity. And I don't think that what you're saying holds true anymore, and I'm not sure it ever did.
Well,